Hmm. Hello, welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm not sure what episode we're on, but I'm having so much fun with this. I know it's been a minute since I've done a Down the Rabbit Hole episode, but I've been mainly focusing on my Just a Breezy Chat podcast, so please forgive me. But anyway, if you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also, subscribe, help a girl out. But today we're going to be talking about an event that happened in Ashtabula, Ohio. So, what do we think of the word shelter when it comes to mind? Well, shelter has a thematic tie to trains early on, but there are glimpses that have a liberating unpinning, and the rail disaster was anything but. Now, back in 1876, there was this bridge spanning the Ashtabula River in the namesake Ohio town, but it was the night of December 29th that when disaster would strike. As the Pacific Express power passed over, the bridge collapsed. Only the lead car made it to the other side, and the others plunged into the river. Despite the water, a fire broke out when a passenger train's oil lanterns set the coal fire heating stoves. Many who survived the fall perished in the flames, and in total there were 92 out of 160 aboard that died that night. Now, the Astat now the Ashtabula River Railroad disaster. It was a failure of a bridge over the in Ohio, and it was a fateful night on December 29th, 1876, that all but the least locomotives went into the river, and the train's oil lanterns and cold fire heating stoves would set the wooden stoves alight. Firefighters declined to extinguish the flames, leaving individuals to try to pull themselves. And many who survived the crash burned to death in the wreckage. Now, the accident would kill 92 of 160 people, as I said before, and it was the worst railway accident in U.S. history in the 19th century, and the worst railway accident in general until the Great Train Wreck of 1918. However, it remains the third deadliest railroad U.S. accident in history. So, what do we know? We know that the Ashtabula, Ohio Railroad disaster um, was one of the worst in history. In this event, as I said, in this event, what happened when a Lakeshore, Michigan Southern Railway train at the Pacific Express plunged into the Ashtabula River over 100 yards from the railroad station in Ashtabula, Ohio, and it topped the Great Train Wreck in 1918 in Nashville. Now, let's talk about some historical accounts now. Um, the first one it will be from the Chicago Tribune from December 30th, 1876, with the proportions of the Ashtabula horror are now approximately known in daylight, in which allowed findings to be enumerated into the light and reveal the fact that two out of every three passengers on that fated train are lost. Of the 160 whom the main conducted, 59 can be accounted for. The remaining 100 burned to ashes in a shapeless lumps of charred flesh, lies under the ruins in the bridge of the train. Now, the disaster was dramatically complete and no element of horror was wanting. First, the crash of the bridge, in the agonizing moments of suspense as the seven laden cars plunged down into their fearful leap into the icy river. Then, the fire, which came to devour all had been left alive by the crash. Then the river, which gurgled up under the broken ice and offered another form of death, and finally fighting a blast filled with snow, which froze and benumbed. Um, those who had escaped water and fire. It was a it was an ideal tragedy, and The scene of the accident was the valley of a creek which, flowing down the eastern margin of the Ashtabula village, passed under the railroad tree, and for 100 miles east of the station, a lone wooden trestle work lasted for many years after the Lakeshore Road was built. Still, as the road was improved, there was many superseded about 10 years with an iron house thrust that was built at the Cleveland shops, resting at either end upon high stone flank or heavy earthen embankments. Now, the iron structure was a single span of 159 feet, and this was crossed by a double track 73 feet about the water, which at that time is now from the 36 deep and covers, and the descent into a valley on the other side of the precipitous, and the hills and slopes are piled with heavy drifts of snow, and there are no little difficulties in reaching the wreck after the disaster became known. So, the disaster is said to have occurred around shortly before 8 o'clock, give or take. It was the wildest winter night in that year, and 3 hours behind its time, the Pacific Express, which had left New York at the time before, struggled along the drifts of the blinding storm. The 11 cars were a heavy burden to the two engines, and when the leading locomotives broke down off the cliffs beyond the ravine and rolled across the bridge, the train was moving at least less than 10 miles an hour, and the headlamp threw. I got cut there. Sorry, I have no clue how I got there. Oh my gosh. Sorry, guys. I just found a random cut on my arm, and I don't know how I got it. But I'm a girl, so I get random cuts and bruises in general. Anyway, let's get back to this, okay? But the headlamp threw but a short and dim flash of light, and so thick that the air was driving snow, and the train crept across the bridge. And the leading engine had reached solid ground beyond, and its driver had just given the steam when something in it under the gearing of the bridge snapped. Uh-oh. Then what could that have been? For an instant there was a confused crackling of beams and grinders, ending with a tremendous crash, and as the whole train but the leading engine broke through the framework and fell into a heap of crushed and splintered ruins at the bottom, notwithstanding the wind and storm, the crash was heard by many people within doors of half a mile. For a moment there was a silence, a stunned sensation among the survivors who, in all stages of mutilation, lay piled among the dying and the dead. Then arose the cries of the maimed and suffering. The few who remained unhurt hastened to escape from the shattered cars. Now they crawled out of the window into the freezing water waist deep, men, women, and children, with limbs bruised and broken, punched, timbers and transfixed by jagged splinters, begging with their last breath for aid that no human power could give. So, 5 minutes later, the train fell. The fire in the cars piled against the abutments at iron broke out. A moment later, the flames from the smoking car and the first coach piled across each other, nearing the middle of the stream in less than 10 minutes after the catastrophe. Every car in the wreck was on fire, and the flames, fed and by the dry furnace work, fanned by the icy gate, licked up the ruins of the trains that they had been tinder. Destruction was so swift that the mercy was baffled. Men who, in the bewilderment of the shock, sprang out and reached into solid ice and went out there at the arrived children and found them suffocating and roasting in the flames. Now, the neighboring residents were startled by this crash. Rightfully so, right? And they were lighted to the scene and by the conflagration, and this made out the prompt assistance too late. So by midnight, the cremation was complete, and the storm was subsided, but the wind still blew fiercely, and the cold was was more intense. When morning came, we all that remained of the Pacific Express was a row of cars, axles, brake irons, truck fumes, and twisted rails in the black pool at the bottom of the gorge. Now, the wood had been burned completely away, and the ruins were covered with white ashes. Here and there, a mass of charred, smoldering substance set up a little cloud and sickening vapor, which said that the human flesh was so yielding to the corrosion of the fires. Um, on the crest of the western Abutin, half buried in snow, there stood the rescue locomotive, all that remained of the fated train. And as the bridge fell, its driver had given its quick head of steam, which tore the draw and had its tender and liberated engine short forward and buried in the snow. The other locomotive was thrown backward by the falling train, tumbled over the pier, and fell upward onto the express car behind the engine. Folsom escaped with a broken leg. However, he cannot tell, nor can anyone else imagine. There is no death list to report. There can be none until the list of missing ones who traveled by the Lakeshore Drive Road on Friday is made up. So, there are no remains that could ever be identified. Um, now, the three charged shapeless lumps recovered that afternoon when all hosts of old or young, male or female, black or white, no man could tell. They are all alike in this part of death. So, but but that is it, guys. What do you think of that crazy train accident? I know my friend Ian would love this episode for sure. He loves trains and stuff like this. Is what I think will fascinate him really. But that is it. Join me next time. Y'all have a great day and a happy summer. Try to enjoy it before